Hello everyone, welcome to our show, and today I have two very special guests, chosen vessels of the Lord who have been doing amazing, extraordinary work here in the New England area and really nationally as well, having an impact on the church and on the culture, and because of their transformative work over the years, I wanted to have them in our program and have a conversation with them. Today I have with me Kris Mineau of the Massachusetts Family Institute, also a pastor of many years, and also a member of the Armed Forces in another lifetime.
Yes.
Colonel with the
U.S. Air Force.
U.S. Air Force, and now very actively involved in issues concerning society, transformation, politics, and the role of the church in all of these issues that are affecting our society, and doing an amazing job and very faithful work over the years that I have admired so much, and have been privileged to be a part of it as well.
Because I get to work with wonderful pastors like you, Roberto. Well, no, you make my job easy.
You honor us really with your faithfulness and doing work that is not very pleasant, that sometimes can be controversial and seen in a very negative light, but very useful, I think, and very prophetic. And I really want to talk a little bit more about that in a few seconds. But Massachusetts Family Institute has been such an extraordinary organization, and I think it's a privilege for us to have you here.
You're most kind, and it's a blessing to be here tonight.
Looking forward to a great conversation. And here as well we have Bethany Temple, who is directing the Justice House of Prayer in the Boston, Cambridge area, and doing extraordinary work with young people, college students, issues of intercession, and also ultimately, seeking the same thing that Kris's work is pursuing, which is cultural transformation, spiritual transformation, affecting our society, and hopefully bringing America back to those godly values that we treasure so much, and which I think has made America great, and which need to be reinforced. So welcome both of you, and thank you for being here. And I'd like to maybe start with Kris. I know that recently MFI, the Massachusetts Family Institute, celebrated 20 years of extraordinary service here in Massachusetts, and also I think all over America, because your work reaches beyond that, and your connections with other institutions that are nationally oriented is very significant. So tell us a little bit about where do you see MFI right now in terms of what you have accomplished. What are some of the salient things? I just recently heard that the bathroom bill, for example, was finally vacated, and you guys worked very hard, to make that possible. And I'm sure it's been a difficult job. So there are some good things happening, but also I'm sure that there are some things that give you reason to pause and to know that there's still a lot of work ahead. But where do you see MFI right now and the future?
Maybe it'd be good for people to understand the history that 20 years ago, Dr. James Dobson of Focus on the Family had the vision of state versions of Focus, doing the same work that Focus does on a national scale to do within the individual states. And so today we have 40 of these family policy councils in 40 individual states, and that we work together on national things, but then we really focused on the social issues from a Judeo-Christian worldview in our individual states. And so, as you said, MFI, Mass Family Institute, we've been plowing this rocky soil for 20 years.
Well, you're sort of in the epicenter of a lot of these issues in a way.
Well, it is. Massachusetts is a bellwether for the whole nation in so many ways, culturally, intellectually, financially, politically. Massachusetts has a lot of influence in the rest of the nation. So it is a critical place. And of course, it has the birthplace of our nation.
Isn't it ironic that in this place where so much of what constitutes Christianity in America, now we're fighting in so many ways these issues?
And I always like to remind people that John Adams, who was the father of the Massachusetts Constitution, the oldest living constitution in the world, 1780, and still active today, said that our Constitution is made only for a moral and religious people. It's totally inadequate for the government of any other. And what he meant by that, as well as Washington and Jefferson and even Franklin, believed it was going to be the leaven, the salt and light of the gospel, of the influence of the Bible that would make our Constitution and make the great American experiment successful, that without it, it wouldn't hold together.
Which is a continuation of what some of the pilgrims thought about a city on a hill. that this project of America was going to be something that was going to be an example for the rest of humanity, and that probably would start a revolution of Christianity all over the world.
And for the first 200 years almost of our nation, we were on a solid Judeo-Christian value foundation. But certainly over the last 40, 50 years, that foundation has been horribly eroding. And I believe we're at critical mass. In fact, that was a DVD done recently by one of our national leaders, Tony Perkins, Critical Mass, and that meant M-A-S-S period, Massachusetts, because of what's been happening in Massachusetts over the last 8 years or so.
Well, you know, sometimes it's the objection is raised when you mention these issues that, well, number one, it's not as clear as sometimes the conservative elements in America want to present this issue of America as in the beginning being a Christian nation. They raise the fact that, you know, some of these founding fathers were not as a Christian as we sometimes want to paint them, or that the Puritans had all kinds of issues with the Native Americans and didn't behave too well with them, and all of the different sins of America throughout history. And so they say this idea of a Christian nation and sort of going back to those Christian foundations is a little bit simplistic. How do you respond to that?
Well, I say that, if I may say so kindly, they're drinking the liberal Kool-Aid, an ungodly Kool-Aid. There's no doubt that this nation, in fact, it's the only nation in all of human history that started from a biblical worldview.
All that's undeniable.
All other nations converted from some form of paganism or animism into Christianity that have a Christian history. But America began right from the beginning, and the roots, of course, was the Reformation coming out of Europe. And they came here so that they could have religious freedom and not all of the wars and turmoils that Europe was experiencing in that era. And there's no doubt. And even they talk about Jefferson. Jefferson, when he became president, had Bible studies in the White House. He had church services in the Capitol building. He paid for chaplains to go to the Indians and paid for the publication of the Bibles to the Indians. The first book printed in America was the Bible in the Algonquin language. Franklin said that the Continental Congress could not proceed unless they stopped and had prayer and fasting and sought Almighty God to intervene on behalf of the birth of the nation. That's why we have Senate chaplains to this day and chaplains in the military. It's because of Ben Franklin.
Well, I'm tempted to just give you all the time and continue talking about it because I find it really fascinating. I think it's undeniable that our founding fathers and mothers and you know, the beginnings of American culture were truly founded on, at the very least, a Christian worldview.
Yes.
There may be complexity in that.
And we're all sinners.
These men were, you know, they were not necessarily our typical evangelicals. They were Enlightenment men as well. And I say men because, you know, they were mainly males. But at the same time,
there were a few good women, like Abigail Adams.
Totally. Powerful figures. It was clear that these people proceeded from a foundation that was Christian, and that a lot of the things that they did in the Constitution and so on was undergirded by the assumption that Christianity was the dominant faith, the dominant religion, the dominant value system. And a lot of what they did was predicated on that assumption. Of course, now in a different context, that has been turned around to say, no, they were not Christians, they were not interested in that, and so on and so forth. I think it's a gross exaggeration and an oversimplification as well. So that's great. Listen, I tell you what, before we continue, let's take a small break because I want to hear from our other guest, Bethany Yeo Temple, and just to talk a little bit about how you see some of these issues and your own involvement in transformation issues and trying to change the culture around. I knew that at some point the Yeo last name was going to come up. That was your maiden name. And somehow I haven't been able to get it out of my head altogether.
My mom still calls me
so
that.
Bethany Temple, which is a very appropriate name for a woman like you who's so involved. I'm sure you've been told that many times with just keeping the temple of the Lord in place through prayer, intercession, and spiritual warfare as well. So good, let's take a break and we'll be back in a couple of seconds.